Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are just waiting for a few more people to dial in, so please bear with us and we'll be back with you very shortly. So thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar this afternoon, Helping Education Succeed in a Changed World, part of our Work Together Anywhere campaign. Your presenter for this afternoon is Jeroen Spearings, who is the Head of Industry Marketing, and it's my pleasure to be a part of the team where I'll be moderating for the whole of this session. Just before we start and I introduce you to Jeroen, I'd like to just go through our agenda for this afternoon. So we have 6 main topics: change in education, the future of the learning spaces, designing spaces, a holistic approach, the current best practices, and how can RICO help? Please remember, if you do have any questions during our presentation, to put them into the chat. You'll be able to see that on your screens in your control panel from this webinar. But please use the chat tool to send your questions to the meeting organisers. The presentation will take approximately 40 to 45 minutes, and at the end of the session, there will be room to answer each and every one of the questions raised. And could we ask you to please avoid using the private chat? This often means questions can be missed, and we'd love to make sure that you have all the answers you need. So without further ado, I'd like to make this introduction of Jeroen, who's going to take you through this afternoon's presentation. Jeroen, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Many thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join our webinar today. I trust you're all, let's say, safe and well. Today we will be sharing with you insights, thoughts and ideas on how to best design future learning spaces in higher education, and how, let's say, digital transformation, innovations, emerging technologies can actually help create meaningful and impactful spaces for learning. My name is Jeroen Spearings. I'm based in the Netherlands and I work for RICO Europe in the field of education and higher education for the past 11 years. We've chosen, as Linda explained, we've chosen to host a series of webinars to help education succeed. This third webinar will be about designing and developing future learning spaces that help accelerate the transformation in education and will facilitate and support, let's say, more active learning and challenge-driven education. Today, we would like to start our webinar with a quote of Sir Ken Robinson, who sadly passed away this summer. He was a pioneer on let's say, transformation in education. Designing future learning spaces and the future of education has nothing or let's say little to do with technology. Of course it can play a role, but the discussion, the conversation should clearly not only be about technology. It should clearly be a discussion on how to best support human flourishing in times of disruption. To us, let's say this quote highlights the essence of the transition and shift in education. Now, let's move on to our next slide and take a little bit of a step back and look at the current state of education in a bit more detail. The shift and the transition we just highlighted is not new for education. Education started on this, let's say, transformation journey already years ago, prior to the pandemic. And it's important to continue that journey and accelerate. Continuation of everything that is displayed on this slide is critical and key in order to shape the future of education. Let's say from using data, cognitive computing, artificial intelligence, and analytics to drive personalization, to the adoption of active learning and new forms of blended learning, to deepen the understanding and, let's say, redesign of student and teacher mobility post-pandemic, to acceleration of your curriculum reform, the focus on 21st century skills, but also the implementation of challenge-driven education. All of this is important and key in order to shape the future of education. In addition to that, we believe that more focus, more emphasis, more efforts should go into, let's say, student and teacher well-being, especially now given the current situation. Now, let's move on to our next slide and discuss in a bit more detail how these developments, how these opportunities and challenges are impacting the development and the design of future learning spaces. Learning spaces come in different shapes and sizes. And before you start your journey, we believe it's important to kind of have a little bit of an internal discussion on your definition of learning spaces. And we should ask ourselves the questions, are we referring to, let's say, collaboration spaces or more personal spaces? Do we include libraries? Do we discuss virtual spaces, presentation spaces, or maybe all of the above? When researching this topic, we came across such a wealth of information, insights, ideas, and best practices on how to best design spaces for learning that support human flourishing. Based on those insights, we understood that, let's say, taking a human-centric approach is clearly the best option. This should be the starting point of your journey. Adopting a human-centric approach, we then also need to better understand how to balance, let's say, different concepts of learning or different elements of learning, such as do we understand for, or do we design, not understand, but do we design for passive learning or more active learning, supporting group learning or project-based learning? Do we design for individuals, or do we design for groups who are working together? Do we design for one location, or do we design for multiple locations who maybe need to be connected to support multi-location learning? Do we design for more formalized teaching, which is more teacher-centric, or do we design more for, let's say, self-directed learning, which is much more student-centric? Do we design for private education, which is much more closed, no recording, nothing will be shared outside of that learning experience? Or do we design for open spaces, for where recording and streaming is much more possible? Find your balance is critical. Search for coherence, because there is no right or wrong here. Experiment and determine what works best for you, for your university, in your situation. Don't just, let's say, duplicate, because what works best for one university might not work best for yours. Let's say, learn from best practices, learn to adopt, learn to, let's say, rethink and how this might be used in your situation, and learn how to best apply. Now let's move on to our next slide and look at the design process in a bit more detail. When designing spaces for learning and collaboration, it's important to, let's say, acknowledge three guiding principles. First, clarify and understand, let's say, your perspective. Which stakeholders should be involved? What is our target audience, and how will they contribute? Understand the connection and the direction, and of course the overall maturity of what you're trying to achieve together. Assessment and understanding of maturity is extremely important when providing, let's say, direction and input for the design process. The summer model, widely used in education, created by Dr. Ruben Putendera, can help and provide guidance in this perspective. Secondly, look at the, let's say, various types of spaces. So clarify where you will be designing. So are we designing for one single room? Are we designing multiple rooms? Will we be combining those rooms to create bigger spaces? Are these rooms situated in one building or in multiple buildings, on one floor or multiple floors? But also, is there a design guide in place for your campus, for your university? Guidance on, let's say, how to best create a connected campus, connected spaces, cross location, cross buildings, cross faculty, even cross subject. And also, given the current situation, do we fully understand the impact of hybrid experiences? Do we design for face-to-face activity only, or do we combine with online activity as well? And then thirdly, let's say our third guiding principle is better understand your taxonomy of spaces. So look at attributes such as what type of activities we would like to deploy utilizing the space. Activities such as, do we want to design to create focus? Do we design for creation or production? Do we design for collaboration, for socialization, or for concentration? And designing, of course, we also need to understand with which components, with which tools we are designing. So components such as furniture that we could use as part of the space, the acoustics in a space. What about seating? Is it fixed or is it completely mobile and flexible? What about displays in which can be used in your space? And of course, when we a little bit understand the different types of activities, if production is a bit more important than other types of activities, we could also think about the role of technology. So, for example, do we include 3D scanning or 3D printing as part of our spaces to be developed? And of course, last but not least, we are designing for human flourishing. So we should have a closer look at our audience. Which type of students, bachelor, masters, which teachers, who are my, let's say, innovators and early adopters within your teacher community? Can they help? Are they enthusiastic about future learning spaces, and can they help innovate? And of course, we need to understand which other stakeholders are involved. Is it purely to support collaboration and learning with students, or maybe other partner universities should be involved, or maybe other private organizations should be involved? Of course, technology is an important component which should be taken into account, but we'll discuss the role of technology in a bit more detail later on. It's important to note that because all of these questions, all of these options, all of these choices, all of these requirements and needs don't have to be all addressed upfront. Use the information to establish your guiding principles for your organization, to establish the direction, and with that direction, that will help you guide through the design process. Now let's move on to our next slide and look at that process in a bit more detail. When we're designing spaces for learning and collaboration, it's important to take a little bit of an holistic approach. The model on this slide is based on a design thinking approach from Dr. Melis Shenova. She's a pioneer in human-centric design, and we've used some of her thinking to actually develop an approach for designing future learning spaces. And when we're designing these spaces for human flourishing, we can only start by taking this human-centric approach. And to do that, we need to focus on 4 key steps. First, we understand. And so we understand the principle of learning spaces. We use the input from, let's say, the guiding principles and start our sense-making process. We practice empathy. We interview teachers. We interview students and maybe other stakeholders. And we see with several different lenses. We foster, let's say, or try to foster curiosity. We let go and we broaden our current knowledge circles. We learn from best practices, other best practices within your university, maybe other best practices outside of your university, past experiences, again, inside your organization or outside your organization, and we document findings, we create insights, and we share meaning. Using the documentation, we develop logic and establish a coherent structure for development of the space moving forward. And then secondly, we start with ideation. So we communicate our vision, we visualize our thinking, and visualization is a key technique to communicate your vision, to communicate your ambition and direction moving forward. It will help to establish perspective, let's say, for your design task ahead. And of course, it will develop perspective for the people who are contributing as part of your development process. The perspective will be used to develop impact scenarios. Impact scenarios are based on outcome. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is it that we're trying to develop? If you have established the impact scenarios, then look at establishing pathways. The path actually to get you where you want to be in the end. When designing pathways, let's say to drive impact, overcome legacies, learn to amplify, build on past experiences is important. Work back from the conversations that you had with teachers, that you had with students, understand their perspective and work backwards from those conversations, but also work back from outcome and try to prevent something that Melissa Nova describes as solution seduction. So don't jump on the solution too quickly. Be open to change, be open to suggestions, be open to ideas from others, be open to opinions, and don't think about the solutions too quick and work from your new reality. And then the third step is all about designing, developing, and delivering the space. So it's important, let's say, to note that when we're moving from step 2 to step 3 in our design process, that communication is essential. So we need to inform senior leadership. We need to inspire our team and align with partners and other stakeholders. Build those connections needed and develop top-down leadership support using your documentation and using your visualization, let's say from step 1 of our design process. This is essential. Senior leadership support is essential moving forward. And then when you try to communicate with the intent to, let's say, create. We need to inspire our team to help them with the development process, to help them create these future learning spaces, but also communicate with the intent to, let's say, understand and clarify. So if we want to inform our senior leadership, we need to help them understand where we are today, where we want to move into the future, which role learning spaces are playing as part of the bigger, maybe blended learning projects, blended learning initiatives within your universities. Provide that structure so that your senior leadership understands and what you're doing is clarified. Then looking at the development in a bit more detail. So select your first prioritized scenario. That should be your starting point and key input for the design of your space. Use your guiding principles and taxonomy to design and develop the space for learning and collaboration. In addition to designing the space itself, also design the experiment, because the space itself without activity is just a waste of time and effort. So we need to design the experiment as well, because we want to test the space. Use a lab environment, maybe to build a prototype of your space, and that prototype can actually be used as part of your experiment moving forward. In the refine stage, so step 4 of our design process, the main objective is to test that prototype. Let's say from observation, feedback collection, and reflection, you will learn actually what goes well and what needs to change. And that input is necessary to develop the next iteration of your space using all of that feedback. When you collect feedback, not only collect feedback from teachers, also collect feedback from your students. During the refine step of the design process, you want to look at three important elements: desirability, feasibility, and viability of the space being developed, and let's say adapt accordingly. And this development is all part of an agile approach. We're using multiple development cycles to, let's say, constantly optimize and enhance the space being developed. So make sure you document the entire process, because that documentation later on can actually be used for best practice development. And that best practice can then be shared with other teachers, maybe outside of your faculty or outside of your university. Now let's move on to our next slide and look at the role of the teacher in a bit more detail. There's a lot of debate about the changing role of the teacher, and today I would not like to debate which roles are changing, which ones will be added, and so on and so forth. It is clear for me personally, but it's also clear for us as an organization that teachers will continue to make a difference now and also in the future. Today, I would like to make the case for, let's say, teacher professional development. We believe that in organizations, in universities, in other levels of education, more emphasis and effort should go into professional development of teachers. New skills are needed to thrive and be successful, let's say, working, collaborating, teaching in learning spaces. And this professional development, it should not only focus on technology training, it should focus on lifelong learning for teachers. Continuous development of skills, of knowledge, of expertise and values is important. Lifelong learning is also key, according to a recent TALIS study from the OECD on teacher job satisfaction. The study concluded that teacher job satisfaction will improve when there is more room, more effort, more time available for learning and professional development of teachers. And especially when you're designing future learning spaces, this is a very important topic. Lifelong learning for teachers, making that case. A combination of, let's say, formal and informal learning can actually help to stimulate lifelong learning for teachers. A model that is frequently, let's say, referenced in organizations is the model from Harold Jarger. He's a Canadian who developed a model for informal learning, which is called personal knowledge mastery. And in the model, he explains how to best, let's say, complement formal learning, formal teaching or formal training, and informal learning in both public and private organizations. And he makes a distinction between three different, let's say, learning situations, or three different types of informal learning. Learning via social networks to, let's say, connect with others, to connect with peers, to discuss diversity of ideas, new thinking and opinions. Second one is learning via communities of practice to challenge assumptions in a let's say, trusted space, maybe a virtual space or a physical setting, to test out new ideas. And then thirdly, learning via teams. And with that, it doesn't mean Microsoft Teams, but learning in teams to share complex knowledge and create value together. All three of these different types of learning situations can actually be applied and are great tools to enable knowledge sharing, to enable best practice sharing when you are designing future learning spaces. Professional development and lifelong learning for teachers is important because the landscape of teaching, the landscape of learning, blended learning, challenge-driven education, technology-enhanced learning will continue to develop. It will continue to evolve and change moving forward. So the capacity for teachers to be flexible and adapt to the changing needs, to the changing requirements and context is actually key in order to thrive and continue to make a difference, let's say, now and in the future. Now let's move on to our next slide and look at the role of technology in a bit more detail. Technology can play a role. to let's say support your future learning spaces design and the development of learning spaces in general. There is of course many information available on learning technologies in general, AV technologies to support and enhance learning. For this webinar, we've tried to classify the various technologies based on three main categories. Media and tools that can actually be used to enhance learning, the environment that supports learning and collaboration, and infrastructure and management to support the operation. It's fair to say that this by no means is an intent to provide the complete picture. But we hope we can provide you with a little bit of guidance and direction on how to best look at technologies that can enhance your learning spaces moving forward. It is important to lead with the design when selecting the right technologies, not the other way around. Let's look at each category in a bit more detail. First, media and tools. So I'm just highlighting a couple of elements just to provide you with a bit of insight on how to best use the technology to enhance your spaces. So first, look at cameras. Of course, nowadays, given the current situations, selecting camera, selecting video is an important element. What we want to stress, or what we want to highlight, is also pay a little bit of attention to, let's say, 360 video experiences. 360 video experiences which actually could be used in mixed reality examples, so complementing augmented reality or complementing virtual reality. In hybrid experiences, also put a lot of effort and attention into selecting the right audio and sound solutions, especially when your spaces become bigger, especially if you're using multi-location learning. Audio and sound quality is essential. If that is bad, it will be a barrier for creating great, meaningful and impactful learning experiences. From the design, your guiding principles, also understand how students will contribute. How will they work together? What will be the role of the teacher? How will they interact? How will they participate using your spaces in these hybrid experiences? So when selecting your video solutions to support, let's say, for example, asynchronous learning or maybe synchronous learning, different video options might be used. When supporting collaboration, I think this is an important element which is sometimes overlooked. When supporting collaboration within your space, when learning activities start to, let's say, occur, you're deploying, you're working together, you're collaborating, also pay a lot of attention to the output. So in other words, think about the next activity. Because when we're designing learning activities in isolation, and we don't think about okay, the output of this, what we've been created in the space needs to be shared with your learning management system, or with a student portal solution, or with other types of systems that you use within your university. Let's say the follow-up activity might get obstructed. So think about the input and output into your space in a bit more detail. Signage may be used to support or stimulate communication when teaching and learning. Both printed signage, maybe as part of your acoustic solutions that you're utilizing in your space, but also digital signage in order to provide more personalized communication in your space for teachers and students. To support more active learning, you may want to think about which software you want to use for, let's say, collaborative creation. So are you standardized on maybe Microsoft Office 365? Think about, is that the best tool that you would like to use to support that collaborative creation in your spaces? Or maybe you're standardized on using Google. Or maybe your learning management system can play a role, or you're using a different type of content management system, or maybe other third-party solutions. So think a little bit about also the, let's say, the software that you use to actually support activity that is taking place in your spaces. With environment, we mean, let's say, both the environment inside your buildings on campus, inside the classroom, but also environment outside your buildings. In environment, we pay a lot of attention to, let's say, furniture that would be able to support learning, but also lighting. And this is sometimes overlooked as well. Lighting can play a very important role to support learning, both artificial lighting and natural lighting. And we know that Philips Lighting, which is now called Signify, is a company that does a lot of research on different types of lighting to better support activities taking place in your learning spaces. If you're interested in that, just let me know, and I can definitely share some interesting information with you on that. But also, when you're looking at your environment, when you're looking at your space, look at your acoustics of the space, which is an important element as well. And then to end this environment section, look at the flexibility and the mobility of your space. Do you want to combine two rooms into creating one bigger room? Do you want to connect multiple locations? What about the mobility of your rooms? Maybe you want to use mobile technologies instead of fixing everything on walls. That will limit the capability of designing specific learning spaces. And then the last category, infrastructure and management. This is all to do with how to manage our spaces, how to monitor our spaces, how to best let's say, support the utilization of your spaces. So make sure that the spaces you design and develop and the technologies you use can be centrally and remotely managed and controlled. So if you want to update your spaces with new software, make sure that that is centrally managed and controlled. In addition to that, also think about how to best support bring your own device. And how to use maybe devices from students, or maybe devices from teachers, or maybe devices from other stakeholders who are providing guest lectures or whatsoever. How to best build secure mobile connections in your spaces. So the ability for these devices to securely interact with displays, with interactive whiteboards that you're using in your space. And then in addition to that, also think about how to access spaces, especially if the number of spaces are growing on campus. How do you manage access? How do you secure access to those spaces? But also, how do you secure the assets that are being used in the spaces, especially if you're using mobile technologies, mobile cameras, mobile audio solutions, maybe mobile displays. And then I want to end this section with also think this through a little bit, how to plan the use of these spaces. And can you increase the planning of these spaces? Can you increase the flexibility of the planning of these spaces? So in other words, if you need to, let's say, on demand or let's say just in time switch to another room, can you find that room? Maybe using mobile apps or using other app solutions to actually plan for you. Can you then see which spaces are available for the number of students that you're actually using? So also that planning and more importantly, the flexibility of that planning is also important as well. Now let's move on to, let's say, our next slide and highlight the success factors in a bit more detail. So on this slide, you can see to us, or for us, the most important success factors. I'm gonna not highlight all of them, but just a couple. And we talked about some of them already in a bit more detail. So the first one I would like to highlight is active learning. Learning spaces are there to support active learning. And so in your designs, in your development, please take that into account. Make the activity, make the spaces so that collaboration, online collaboration, hybrid collaboration is supported moving forward, especially now with this challenge driven education. that is more and more applied when working together with different universities. We talked about human centricity, so I don't have to highlight that in a bit more detail. So your designs should be human centric. We talked about technology. Make sure that it works. Let technology guide you and inspire you. Make sure that your designs are human centric, not technology centric. Another one which we would like to highlight is best practice development, which I think is extremely important when scaling your learning spaces as part of your campus moving forward. So take an agile approach. Start small, develop success and impact, and scale for growth. Let's say from your first or your second or your third success or failure, build best practices and share those proactively, both internally within your institution, but also externally with peers and other subject matter experts. Learn from that reflection, learn from the feedback, and constantly optimize. The next one I think is an important one is simplicity. Keep it simple when you start developing learning spaces, when you start deploying learning spaces on campus. Design for ease of use. We can develop the most advanced spaces with the most advanced technology solutions. But if teachers and students don't use them, it's a complete waste of money, a waste of effort, and a waste of energy. And I think the last point is important because we need the energy to drive long-term change to support the shift in education that we highlighted in the beginning. Another success factor which I believe is important, which can maybe be a bit challenging or maybe a bit difficult. Designing spaces, it should always be a team effort. You cannot design in isolation. So work with a diverse team, work with a diverse team of enthusiasts, of ambassadors, of early adopters or innovators who have a little bit of experience already with experimentation in the classroom, for example. And use that for your first experiment, for your second experiment moving forward. But it should be a collective effort. I'll come back to that in a bit later. We touched on teacher training and support. Teacher professional development is of the essence because as we said, roles are changing, new roles will be introduced, and team play becomes more and more important. Therefore, we should invest in teacher training, skills development skills development programs. And the last success factor which I would like to highlight is within your universities, make sure you build this integrated approach. Yes, you can start off with different experiments in different parts of your organization, in different faculties, with different teachers. That is fine. That is fine. But over time, please make sure you build this integrated approach, let's say based on 3 perspectives. The first one is being your campus. So make sure that different locations on campus can be connected. They should not be connected. It's not a prerequisite that they should be connected, but can be connected. If you want to, let's say, just in time, create a bigger room, or you have more students, or you want to deploy a different learning activity that you thought of before, you wanted to have that flexibility. So make sure that the rooms can be connected, so that and this has an effect on, let's say, the room design and the technologies you use as part of your space, but it also has an effect on the teams who are creating these rooms. And now the teams are connecting as well. They are sharing best practices. They are sharing thoughts and ideas proactively, and this will help to develop longer term impact. The second perspective of your integrated approach is your organization. So we touched on this before: teamwork, team effort. So make sure you collaborate and involve all parts of your organization, not only education, not only teachers, not only students, but also IT, also facility management, also maybe real estate, because it will have an impact longer term on how we design our buildings. So create your bottom-up approach with that senior leadership support. And then the third part, or the third perspective of that integrated approach, is learning. Combine and integrate with other blended learning or other learning initiatives or projects that are taking place within your university. So don't take that siloed approach, but really take an approach where you could say, over time, I could really embed in my organization. With that, we would like to hear from you. So we would welcome your feedback on these success factors, and maybe you can think about some other success factors that you've learned building learning spaces at your own universities. So I want to hand it back to Linda. Linda, could you launch for us the poll?
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Your responses are greatly appreciated. It does help us in our evaluation. So thank you for taking the poll. Some interesting results coming through, but we'll give it another 15 seconds or so to allow everybody to have their say.
Perfect, perfect.
So another 10 seconds, everybody, and we will be closing. Thank you. We are closed now, and we will share those results with you at the end of this presentation. Back to you, Jeroen.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Yeah, let's move on to our next slide and talk a little bit about adoption and scale within your organization, how to best design and develop that. So adoption is key. Adoption is key in order to grow not only the number of spaces being used, let's say on campus or off campus, but adoption is also key in order to support that shift in education. So monitor, track usage, but not only usage, also progress, movement, and increase the number of experiments. Adoption, on the one hand, is about taking that agile approach that we touched on before and constantly optimize what is being implemented, what is being delivered via that bottom-up approach. Adoption is also about creating a new standard. Based on all the best practices, based on all your experiments, based on all the feedback that you're collecting, develop a new standard way of working for designing learning spaces. We talked about in the beginning about this design guide. Make sure that together with your students, together with your teachers, you develop such a guide and promote that within your university. That is why, again, documentation or documenting your progress is so important. Developing a new standard way of working, let's say, could also part of developing a new standard could also be to develop, let's say, a catalog for learning spaces. Maybe an online database that you could actually promote as part of your intranet or as part of your internet even. And that catalog could actually consist of different designs, different configurations or different setups for learning spaces. So maybe in that catalog you would have a space to support a virtual classroom, or a space to support a hybrid classroom, or a design to support maker spaces, or to a design or a configuration to support a living lab, or many other types of learning spaces. So the standard will also help to develop a community of subject matter experts, because you're building on this idea of teamwork and connecting all of these different spaces together. The experts, together with the catalog, together with your agile approach will actually help increase adoption over time. It is important to note that sometimes we need to kind of reframe the way we look at certain challenges, we look at certain opportunities in education, especially when designing future learning spaces. People in your team, people in your faculty, or even outside your organization will actually help you to look at specific challenges and opportunities differently. Take advantage of that. It is important to be open for change, open for other opinions, open for other ideas, and sometimes then shift your frame of reference. It's only then when let's say true transformation can happen and we can support that shift in education. Now let's move on to our next slide and share with you or highlight with you some best practices that we found. Today, we would like to highlight 6 best practices with all of you as part of this webinar moving forward. We found many more. We found many more. This is an area of development which is so much in development. There's a wealth of information that you can find. If you just Google best practices, learning spaces, there is an enormous amount of really good reference cases, best practices that you can find. The first one we would highlight is the Future Teacher Education Lab at the University of Lisbon in Portugal. What we liked about this example is in the approach that they take, they open up the space to teachers of primary and secondary education of all levels of education across Portugal to stimulate the usage of technology enhanced learning. The space itself is also a training facility for those teachers, and this is a true multidisciplinary approach across these different levels of education, supported by the University of Lisbon. In Portugal alone, we found more than 30 different types of future learning spaces across these different levels. The second one we would like to highlight is the Links Future Learning Spaces at the University of Haifa in Israel. What is very interesting about these 6 different types of learning spaces they developed is that all activities they do is evidence-based. All spaces are equipped with video analysis, and they can actually use it to research, let's say, the new developed spaces and the activities they deploy. In this case, it's let's say a true combined effort between teachers and researchers to actually enhance their learning moving forward. The third one we would like to discuss is the Research Lab EduSpace at the University of Tallinn in Estonia. What is interesting about this integrated approach is that research and education is also working together, like in the example of Haifa, but now with the support of the European Union Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. In addition to that, the University of Tallinn has opened up the space to the EdTech startup community in Estonia to actually, with help of the space, co-create, co-research, but also co-develop future EdTech products and solutions. Number 4 we'd like to highlight is a bit of a different project. It's I think it's still a project, but it's a combined project of 3 universities working together. Now, in itself, that is not that different because that is, of course, happens much often. But these 3 universities are working together to better understand the shift to digital learning spaces because of the current pandemic. The SRH University of Heidelberg, which is a University of Applied Sciences in Germany, the University of Florence in Italy, and the University of Minho in Portugal, they are planning with students and young researchers from those participating universities to investigate how the change from traditional formal and informal learning spaces to digital learning spaces is actually taking place, and what effects it is having on all members of those participating universities. And to better understand that shift, I think is well essential moving forward, giving the post pandemic let's say developments and challenges. And it's really interesting to learn that as part of this project, they look at informal learning, not only taking place in a building, in a classroom, but also outside of the campus, in the city. So they're looking at really informal learning spaces like cafes, co-working spaces, libraries, etc. moving forward. Another example of such an informal learning space in Heidelberg is actually the Learning Village. They call it the Learning Village Bergheim, where the development and design of an urban district is actually used as a starting point to develop this learning village, or to develop this learning space. And they're networking with existing education institutes of all different levels, private organizations, to actually create a sustainable space across various locations in the city. How to combine this with, let's say, the digital world and digital resources is also part of that project. Another best practice we would like to share with you today is the one from, let's say, Utrecht University. What we like about this example is the very structured approach. They've developed a bottom-up approach with a lot of senior leadership support. And in this approach, they're constantly looking to connect different ideas, different projects, different initiatives, and different activities. And they're constantly adapting and building on, let's say, these past experiences, the current projects, and they're kind of bringing it all together. The bringing it all together is almost like they're using that as a learning activity or a learning exercise in itself. And from that bringing everything together, they document that. And what they've done is they've developed a design principles game to actually design future learning spaces. And that for them is kind of the standard approach that I was talking about earlier. So a game with design principles to actually design your future learning spaces. And the last best practice I would like to share with you today is a specific room. Now, learning spaces is more than just creating fancy rooms. Just to clarify that up front. But the Link 100 room of the Learning Innovation Center at Oregon State University in the US is a very interesting room. It's round shaped and it's like a learning theater with the teacher in the center and all of the media, all of the content distributed to the side of the circle. What we also like about the Learning Innovation Center at Oregon State is that it's a very structured and professional approach, similar to what Utrecht University is doing, but they have expanded that approach with that online catalog. They are promoting on their public website the different spaces that they're using internally to enhance learning, to enhance teaching, and to support collaboration. It's almost like they're using it for promotional purposes to attract students. Now, we need to be careful with that, of course, but it's an interesting kind of next step in the evolvement of learning spaces. Now, let's move on to one of our last slides. I would like to quickly explain, I'm a little bit conscious of time, what is our role in all of this? Jeroen, great, nice presentation, nice content, etc. But what is the role that you play? Basically, as an AV systems integrator, we work together with best of breed AV partners to develop solutions for higher education, for all different types of learning, not only to support future learning spaces, but also to support, for example, remote learning, virtual classrooms, 360 video experiences for live events. And we've done that for multiple universities across Europe. So we're working together with LMU University in Munich, with Utrecht University in the Netherlands, for Warsaw University in Poland, Seville University in Spain, we've implemented projects to, let's say, upgrade lecture halls with richer video, richer audio equipment to, let's say, better support hybrid experiences moving forward. And next to that, we're also supporting 2 European universities. You might be aware that the European Union have developed a program specifically to support the development of European universities. We are supporting 4EU+, which is a alliance of 7 different universities, and we're supporting Charm EU, which is an alliance of 5 different universities across Europe who are working together to provide new courses, to provide challenge-driven education, and to make sure that students are able to work together across these different universities. And we believe that future learning spaces will continue to play a key role in that moving forward. So moving on to our next slide, the final slide. So designing future learning spaces. So what is the future of learning spaces? We believe that technology will evolve. Technology will provide a richer experience in the future, more integrated, more easier to use. But the future of learning spaces, the future design of learning spaces has little to do with technology. Technology will continue to play a role, but we believe that professional teacher development is extremely important. Skills development programs now and in the future will make a difference. Treat your students as partners. Make sure that they are part of the design process. Make sure that they're part of the development process. Make sure that they are part of the feedback process. Scale for growth and try to develop that new standard for design, not a new standard space, but the new standard for designing spaces. Increase usage and teacher adoption. So stimulate that teachers reach out to each other, work together, share best practices, share ideas, thoughts, and challenges. And of course, then make learning spaces or make these spaces part of your bigger integrated approach for blended learning. It's clear that a one-size-fits-all approach will not work. We need to develop an approach for customization and personalization. That should be the new standard. The future will be about human centricity, for sure. Will be about teacher and student support and adoption, and simplicity. It's clear that we can't predict our future. That is too difficult. But what we can do is create it together. Linda and I hope that this webinar was helpful for you. It gave you a little bit of insight, a little bit of guidance. We will share the slides with you afterwards. Let's now hand it back to Linda so that she can share with us the results of the poll and maybe share with us some questions.
Thank you, Jeroen. And I'm just going to share those results for you right now. So you can see that the top runner here was the senior leadership support, closely followed equally by professional development for teachers and centricity and simplicity. So thank you to everybody who took part in this poll. And as Jeroen said, we will circulate and it will be part of the recording for you later. Now, as Jeroen, I'm very, very conscious on time. We have a couple of minutes left for Q&A. Jeroen, we do have one in the chat at the moment, and it is as follows. When I can get to it. No, I'm afraid it's just dropped off. No, yeah, we've got it again. No, it's fine. Is teamwork also important when using the learning spaces we develop?
That is a very interesting question, actually. The short answer is yes. What we've seen, it depends a little bit on the type of space you develop, of course, but for example, when using virtual classrooms, it is important to maybe have support available when, let's say, deploying or utilizing virtual classrooms. So like we're doing now, Linda, when you would like to use polls, when you would like to use other digital tools available when you would like to use maybe a second screen or whiteboard. It is important to have someone with you who could help you with, let's say, those different elements of it. So if you're working in a very active learning space with maybe different projects working together, of course it depends on the number of teams or the number of projects groups that you're working with, but if it exceeds maybe 5 or 6, it would be helpful to have a second person in the room as well to help provide support and to provide guidance and to help with facilitation. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We are at the top of the hour now. So if anybody has any further questions, please put them into the chat. We will respond to you outside of this webinar. If anybody needs to contact Jeroen for any further details, his email address is here on the screen now. And of course, it will be included in our recording. We thank you so much for your time. We wish you a pleasant rest of the afternoon. Stay safe, stay well, and we really look forward to seeing you at another one of our webinars. Until then, goodbye and thank you.
Thank you very much and goodbye.